The Korean Mafia boss fired the maid on a Tuesday. No warning, no reason, no mercy. One word from his mouth and her entire world collapsed at his feet. But what his 7-year-old son whispered into his ear that same night would shake the most feared man in all of Gyeonggi to his very core. You are about to witness something that will remind you why love is the only weapon more powerful than power itself. Subscribe now, because this story will stay with you long after it ends. The dismissal lasted 11 seconds. Precious Millie counted them later in the cold stairwell of the Shin estate, pressing her back against the wall so nobody would see her cry. 11 seconds. That was all it took for director Hyun-soo Shin to destroy 4 years of her life. It had started the way most terrible things do, quietly. Precious had been carrying a tray of afternoon tea down the long corridor of the East Wing when she heard voices rise and fall behind the study door, and she had not slowed. She had not listened. She had done what she always did, kept her eyes low, her pace steady, her presence as invisible as the estate demanded. But then the door swung open. Director Shin stepped out first. Tall, sharp-jawed, dressed in a dark coat the color of a winter sky. He was on a phone call, his voice clipped and precise. Behind him, 2 of his men filed out, heads bowed. And then, without looking, without pausing, and without even the smallest hesitation, his shoulder caught the edge of Precious's tray. The tea did not spill on him. It spilled on the floor. But Director Shin stopped walking. He turned, slowly, the way dangerous things always turn, and looked at her for the first time in 4 years, as though she were something he had just noticed on the bottom of his shoe. "You," he said. Precious set the tray down on the side table and straightened. "I apologize, Director Shin. Are you still here?" She blinked. "Sir," I asked, he repeated, each word deliberate. "Are you still here? In my house?" The corridor had gone completely silent. Even his men had stopped breathing. Yes, sir. I work the East Wing rotation. Every Tuesday, and not anymore." That was it. Not anymore. 2 words, 11 seconds from start to finish, including the time it took his assistant to appear with a clipboard and hand her a sealed envelope. Her final pay, calculated to the day. Director Shin did not look at her again. He walked away, resuming his phone call as though nothing of any consequence had occurred, because to him, nothing had. To Precious Millie, 26 years old, the sole financial support of a mother recovering from a serious illness back in her home country. 4 years of spotless service. 0 complaints. 0 late days. Nothing had just ended everything. She took the envelope. She walked to the stairwell. She counted to 11. And then she allowed herself exactly 90 seconds to fall apart before she pulled herself back together. Because falling apart completely was a luxury she had never been able to afford. What she didn't know, what she could not have known, was that 7-year-old Shin Reo had watched the entire thing from the top of the staircase. Little Reo, with his father's sharp eyes and his late mother's enormous heart, had seen everything. The tray, the spill, the 11 seconds, the envelope, and the way Precious walked to the stairwell, straight-backed, dignified, not a single tear visible until the door swung shut behind her. He had stood at the top of those stairs for a very long time. And when his father passed below him on the way to the private dining room that evening, Reo called down, in a voice that was too steady for a 7-year-old. "Appa." Director Shin paused without turning. "Not now. Reo. You fired Miss Precious." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I wanted to." There was a pause. Then Reo said, And these were the exact words that his father's own assistant would later describe as the moment everything changed. Grandmother says that people who hurt others, for no reason, are only hurting because something is broken inside them. Are you broken, Appa? The dining room door did not open. Director Hyun-soo Shin stood in the hallway for a very long time. His assistant, Mr. Tae, Saint would say later that he had never seen the director stand still for that long without it meaning someone was about to have a very bad day. But this time was different. This time, the director's hands were not clasped behind his back in the calculating way they usually were. This time, and Mr. Tae would lower his voice whenever he told this part. This time, the director's hands were at his sides, open, the way a person stands when they have just been handed something they do not know how to carry. He turned around. He looked up at his son, and Rio looked back at him, small, serious, unafraid, in the way that only children and people with nothing left to lose can afford to look at powerful men. "Go to bed," Director Shin said quietly. "Yes, Appa." Rio turned to go, then stopped. "She never once broke anything in 4 years. I kept count." He walked away to his room, and Director Hyun-soo Shin, the man they called the Iron Director of Gyeonggi, the man whose name made business rivals cancel meetings and cross streets, sat down on the bottom stair of his own house and did not move for a very long time. By morning, his decision was made. He would find her. He would, and this was the part that cost him something real, something he had not spent in years. Apologize. What he did not know was that finding precious Millie would pull him into a world he had spent decades trying to leave behind, and that Precious herself was carrying a secret about his estate, his family, and the people he trusted most. A secret so devastating that when it finally surfaced, not one person in that house would walk away unchanged. Precious was already on the early bus when her phone rang, an unknown number, which she did not pick up, because unknown numbers had never once brought her good news. She watched the Shin estate disappear behind a curve in the road and told herself she was relieved. She told herself this was the beginning of something better. Her phone rang again, and again. On the 4th call, she picked up. "Miss Millie." The voice was Mr. Tae's, formal, careful, slightly uncomfortable in the way that men are uncomfortable when they are delivering messages they did not write. "Well, Director Shin requests that you return to the estate at your earliest convenience. He wishes to speak with you directly." Precious looked out the window at the passing road. "Tell Director Shin," she said, in a voice that surprised even herself with its steadiness, "that I no longer work for him, and that I am, therefore, not available at his convenience." She ended the call. 3 minutes later, her phone rang again, and this time, the voice on the other end was not Mr. Tae's. It was a child's. "Miss Precious," said Rio. "It's me. Don't hang up. Please." Precious's thumb hovered over the end button. She had a rule, one she had built carefully over years of learning, that kindness without boundaries only ever hurt the person offering it. The rule was simple. When a door closes, you do not stand outside it. You walk. But it was Rio's voice. And Rio was 7 years old, and none of this was his fault. And he had a way of saying her name that made it sound like it mattered. Like she mattered, in a house full of people who had spent 4 years looking straight through her. "I'm here, Rio," she said. "Are you coming back?" "No, sweetheart." A pause. She could hear him breathing. Small, careful breaths, the kind children take when they are trying very hard not to cry and want you to believe they are succeeding. Is it because of Appa? It's complicated. Appa said sorry. Precious's hand tightened on the phone. He said sorry to you? No. He said it to the wall. But I heard him. He does that sometimes. Says things to the wall, that he can't say to people. I think the wall is easier because it doesn't look at him. She closed her eyes. This child. This extraordinary, heartbreaking child. Rio. He's not bad, Rio said quickly. The way someone says a thing they have rehearsed, because they are afraid they won't be brave enough to say it unrehearsed. He forgot how to be not bad for a while. Grandmother says grief does that to people, makes them hard on the outside, so the sad part doesn't leak out. Precious did not speak for a moment. The bus moved through morning traffic, gray and indifferent. You're very wise for 7, she said finally. I'm almost 8. Almost 8, she agreed. Another pause. Then, on very quietly, will you at least say goodbye? Properly? You left without saying goodbye and I didn't like that. It felt wrong. Precious pressed her free hand flat against her knee and stared at the seat in front of her. She thought about her mother. She thought about the envelope in her bag, enough to cover 3 months, maybe 4 if she was careful. She thought about the 4 years she had given to that estate, and the 11 seconds it had taken to erase them. Then she thought about a 7-year-old boy saying goodbye to his mother's empty room every single night before bed, something she had witnessed once, by accident, and never told anyone about. All right, she said. I'll come say goodbye. She told herself that was all it would be. She was wrong about that. Spectacularly. Completely. Life-alteringly wrong. The estate looked exactly the same when she returned, which felt strange, because everything felt different. The iron gate. The long driveway lined with trees just beginning to lose their leaves. The wide front steps where she had stood every Tuesday morning for 4 years, breathing in the cold air before going inside to begin. Mr. Tay met her at the door, visibly relieved, which told her more about how Director Shin had been behaving since morning than any words could have. Miss Millie, thank you for coming. I came to say goodbye to Rio, she said clearly. That is all. Of course. He stepped aside. Then, lowering his voice in the way people do when they are saying something true that they aren't supposed to say. For what it's worth, yesterday was wrong. Everyone here knows it. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them said anything more. She found Rio in the East Garden, sitting on the low stone bench near the persimmon tree, kicking his feet back and forth in that rhythmic way he had when his mind was working very hard on something. He looked up the moment she came through the garden door, and the relief on his face, raw and immediate and completely unguarded, was almost too much to look at directly. He did not run to her. He had learned, in the particular way that children of powerful and emotionally contained men learn, to hold his feelings at a slight distance in public. But his feet stopped kicking, and he straightened, and something in his small face unlocked. You came, he said. I said I would. She sat beside him on the bench. For a while, neither of them spoke. The garden was quiet, just wind, and the soft sound of leaves, and somewhere in the house behind them, the low, distant sound of a man who did not know how to be in the same space as his own guilt. He's been in the study all morning, Rio said, not looking at her. He doesn't come out when he's thinking about something hard. That's between him and his conscience, Precious said. No, what's a conscience? The part of you that knows when you've done something wrong. Rio considered this. He has one. He just locked it somewhere for a while. He turned to look at her. Direct, serious, those sharp eyes that belonged entirely to his father, but somehow, in his face, felt completely safe. Miss Precious, if Appa said sorry, really said it, would you come back? Rio, not for him, for me. I know that's selfish. Grandmother says I shouldn't use feelings to make people do things. But I don't. I don't have a lot of people. Appa is very busy, and Grandmother is far away. and the other staff don't. They don't really talk to me. You talk to me, every Tuesday. You always asked what I was reading, and you never pretended to care. You actually cared. Precious looked at this child, this small, perceptive, a quietly lonely child, and felt something in her chest do something complicated and painful that she did not have a clean word for. I did care, she said. I still do. Then, Rio! The voice came from the garden doorway. Both of them turned. Director Hyun-Soo Shin stood at the entrance to the garden, one hand resting against the doorframe. He was not wearing his coat. That was the first thing Precious noticed. He was always in his coat, always composed, always fully armored. Without it, and in just a dark shirt, he looked, not smaller exactly, but more like a person and less like a symbol. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had spent the night sitting with something heavy and had not managed to put it down. Give us a moment, he said to Rio, and his voice was different, still measured, still controlled, but with something underneath it, something that had not been there yesterday, something that sounded, against all reason, like effort. Rio looked at Precious. She gave him the smallest nod. He slid off the bench, paused to give his father a long, evaluating look that was frankly remarkable coming from someone who still had to stand on tiptoe to reach the kitchen counter, and then walked inside. The garden went very quiet. Director Shin walked toward her, not with the commanding stride she was used to, but carefully, the way you walk toward something you are not sure will let you get close. He stopped a short distance from the bench and did not sit. He looked at her, really looked, the way he had not in 4 years, the way that made her realize with sudden unsettling clarity that she had spent 4 years being invisible, and he had spent 4 years letting her be. Miss Millie, he said. Director Shin. I owe you an apology. He said it evenly. But she had spent enough time in this house to hear the difference between words that cost a person nothing and words that cost them something real. These cost him something. What I did yesterday was... It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. And it should not have happened. Precious looked at him steadily. She had prepared herself for this on the bus ride back, prepared a clean, professional response that accepted the apology without warmth and ended the conversation politely. She had it ready. It was good. It protected her. Why did you do it? She asked instead. He did not look away. I had a difficult morning. I chose the wrong target for what I was feeling. I was a target, she said, not a person. He was quiet for a moment. Yes. The honesty of it, unvarnished, no deflection, surprised her. She had expected excuses. Men like Director Shin always had excuses, shaped like explanations, polished to sound like reasons. But he had just said yes, plain and clean, and costing him something visible. Your son told me you apologized to the wall, she said, and something crossed his face, not quite embarrassment, but related to it. He wasn't supposed to hear that. He hears everything. I know. A pause. He is very much like his mother. The garden was quiet for a long moment. The position is still yours, if you want it, Director Shin said. Better schedule, better terms. Mr. Tae will provide the details. I will not interfere with your work again. He paused. I understand if you choose not to. The decision is yours. He turned to go. Director Shin. He stopped. Precious stood from the bench. She had not planned to say anything else, but something. Some instinct she had learned to trust over years of reading rooms and people and silences, told her that this moment was a door, and that what she said next would determine which side of it they both ended up on. Your son said grief makes people hard on the outside, she said. He said it, so you won't leak. She paused. He's right. And I think you know he's right. And I think the fact that a 7-year-old has learned to explain his father's pain to strangers in order to protect that father, that should concern you far more than anything that happened to me yesterday. Director Shin did not move. I'll consider the position, she said. But if I come back, and I haven't decided, it will be on the understanding that in this house, I am a person. Not furniture. Not a fixture. Not a target. She held his gaze. Are we clear? The pause that followed was long. Not the dangerous kind. Not the silence of a powerful man deciding what consequence to assign. The other kind. The kind that means something is shifting. Clear, he said. She nodded once. He went inside. Precious sat back down on the bench. She pressed her palms together between her knees and looked at the persimmon tree and thought, you should have taken the clean exit. You had a clean exit. But she already knew she was going to say yes, so not because of him. Not because of the apology, which was real, but not yet enough. Not because of the better terms, though she needed them. Because of Rio. Because of a small boy who kept count of things that nobody else thought worth counting. 4 years, 0 broken things. And who deserved at the very minimum one person in this house who showed up on Tuesdays and actually asked what he was reading. She did not yet know, could not have guessed, what saying yes was going to cost her. She did not know about the encrypted files in the East Wing office. She did not know about the woman who had been watching the estate for 6 weeks from a rented room on the far hill. She did not know what Rio had seen the night his mother died. She did not know any of it. She said yes anyway, and the story, the real story, began. Her first week back was strange, in the way that returned things are always strange. Familiar and foreign at the same time. Like wearing a coat you had forgotten you owned, and finding something unexpected in the pocket. The staff treated her differently, not unkindly. They had never been unkind, but with a new kind of careful attention. The way people treat someone who has just demonstrated, quietly but unmistakably, that they have a spine. Cook Madame Heo, who had worked in the Shin estate for 19 years and had seen 3 household managers come and go, nodded at Precious on her first morning back, with an expression that said many things without saying any of them. Director Shin was not warm. She had not expected warm. But he was present in a way he had never been before, which was somehow more unsettling. He noticed when she was in a room, not with the entitled, a dismissive awareness of someone checking that the furniture was in order, with the slightly uncomfortable awareness of a person who has said something real to someone and is still adjusting to what that costs. He said good morning to her on the 3rd day. Just that, good morning, as she was passing the study with fresh towels. Nothing more. But in 4 previous years, he had not once said good morning. She had checked her own memory 3 times to be sure. Good morning? Director Shin, she said, and kept walking. Rio, predictably, was delighted. He had greeted her return with a very serious handshake that had made her work extremely hard to keep a straight face, and then had immediately launched into a detailed account of the book he was currently reading. Something about a boy who discovers a library where every book contains someone's real memory. The boy can feel what the people in the memories felt, Rio explained, walking beside her as she restocked the East Wing linen closet. Like, actually feel it. So he has to be careful which books he opens, because some of the memories are very sad, and they stay with him. That sounds like a lot of responsibility for one person, Precious said. It is. But he keeps reading anyway, because he says even the sad memories are better than not knowing. Rio paused. I think that's brave, Do you think that's brave? I think that's true, Precious said, which is sometimes the bravest kind of thing. Rio considered this with the particular intensity he brought to most things. Miss Precious, can I ask you something? You can ask. Do you miss home? She went still for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, before she continued folding the linen. Every day, she said. What do you miss most? My mother's laugh, she said, without having to think. It's the loudest thing in any room she's ever been in. She laughs, and it fills up all the corners. Rio smiled, one of his rare full smiles, the ones that transformed his face from serious to something incandescent. I miss my mother's hands, he said. She had very small hands. She used to cover my eyes with them when I was scared of something and say, "Close your eyes. I've already looked. Nothing is there." Precious stopped folding. She turned to look at him. He was still smiling, but his eyes had gone somewhere else. Somewhere far and quiet, where 7-year-olds should not have to go alone. She sounds wonderful, Precious said softly. She was. He blinked, came back. Appa doesn't talk about her. I think it still hurts too much. A pause. I think that's why he's hard. He's been sad so long that the sad turned into something else. Rio, she hesitated. Has your father? Has he talked to anyone? About your mother? The boy shook his head. He doesn't do that. And he says people who talk about their feelings to strangers are giving away what belongs inside. Precious thought about this. Then she thought about the man who apologized to walls and felt something she refused to call sympathy, but that walked very close to it. What belongs inside, she said carefully, has a way of coming out anyway. Just sideways. Rio looked at her. Like firing someone for no reason. Yes, she said. A bit like that. He nodded gravely. I'll tell him you said so. Please don't. I won't, he said, but I'll think it loudly near him. She looked at him for a long moment, and then, despite everything, despite all of it, she laughed. And Rio's face lit up as though she had given him a gift. What neither of them noticed, in that moment of warmth in the East Wing corridor, was that the door to the adjacent office was slightly open, and that Director Shin, who had been walking past on his way to a meeting and had paused at the sound of his son's voice, was standing on the other side of it, still, listening, his hand resting flat against the wall in that open way his assistant had noticed on the night of Rio's question on the stairs. He stood there for a long time. Then, very quietly, he walked away, and did not go to his meeting after all. He went instead to the East Wing office, sat down at his desk, and opened a drawer he had not opened in 14 months. Inside it was a photograph. He looked at it for a very long time. He did not cry. He had not cried in 14 months. But something in his face, something rigid, something that had been locked at a particular angle for a very long time, shifted slightly, like a joint that has been held too tight for too long, finally allowed to bend just 1 degree. He put the photograph on top of the desk, but he left it there when he finally went to his meeting. He left it there when he came back. It was still there 3 days later when everything began to fall apart. It started with a phone call that came at 2 in the morning, not to Director Shin's personal phone, but to the estate's main security line. The guard who took it came to Mr. Tay. Mr. Tay stood in the hallway outside the security office for 45 seconds, deciding what to do. Then he went to the director. Precious was not there for any of this. She had gone home for the evening, as she always did. She was day staff, not residential. But cook Madame Hio, who lived in the estate's eastern residential quarter and had the particular insomnia of someone who had spent 19 years responsible for other people's mornings, was awake. and she saw Mr. Tay's face as he crossed the courtyard toward the director's wing. She described it later as the face of a man carrying news that he wished someone else had received. Director Shin took the call himself at 2:18 in the morning. The voice on the other end was female, low, precise, and entirely without warmth. "I know what your people did in Gyeonggi 6 years ago," the voice said. "And I have proof. Not the kind that disappears. The kind that has already been copied and sent to 3 separate locations. You have 72 hours. The call ended when Director Shin sat in his study in the dark for a long time. Then he called Mr. Tay back in and said 4 words. "Find out who called." They found out by morning. Her name, according to the security team's report, was Eleanor Voss, a private investigator, originally from a country far west of Korea, who had been operating under a consulting visa for the past 3 months. She had rented a room on the hill overlooking the estate. She had been watching them for 6 weeks. What the security team could not immediately determine, what Director Shin spent the next 48 hours trying to answer, was who had hired her. Precious arrived for her Tuesday shift at 8:15 and knew immediately that something was wrong. She knew it the way she always knew things in that estate, not from anything visible or stated, but from the particular quality of the silence. The staff moved differently when something was wrong, not faster or slower, but more carefully, as though the air had become slightly dangerous. She went to find Rio first, habit and instinct. He was not in the garden, not in his room. She found him eventually in the small library on the 2nd floor, sitting in the tall chair by the window, with his book open but unread, watching the driveway. "Rio, what happened?" He turned to look at her, and in his face, in those sharp, perceptive eyes, she saw something that frightened her more than the silence in the corridors had. She saw that he knew something specific. "Rio, I wasn't supposed to hear it," he said immediately. "I got up for water. The study door was open. What did you hear?" He was quiet for a moment, in the considering way he had. Working out, she had learned, not whether to tell her, but exactly how. Someone is going to make trouble for Appa, a woman. She has information. About what? About something that happened a long time ago. He paused. Said before I was old enough to understand things. But, Miss Precious, I heard another name. She waited. The woman who called. Rio stopped. Started again. She used a name. I only heard part of it. But I've heard it before. Once. When Appa didn't know I was in the room. His hands tightened on the book. It was my mother's name. The room went very still. Precious looked at him. Her mind was moving very fast, sorting, connecting, trying to find the shape of what she was beginning to understand. "Rio," she said carefully, "the night your mother, when she passed. Do you remember anything from that night?" He did not answer right away. "Rio, you can tell me. I remember a door," he said very quietly. "A door closing, and then quiet, and then people running." He swallowed. "And I remember Appa's face when they told him. It didn't look like sadness. It looked like shock. Like he didn't know. Like he wasn't." He stopped. "Like he wasn't expecting it," Precious said. Rio looked at her with those devastating eyes. "He loved her," he said. "Really loved her. I know what people say. But I know what I saw. He loved her. And I think someone took her from him. And I think that woman on the phone knows about it." A pause. "And I think whoever sent her wanted to use that to hurt Appa." The library was completely silent. Precious sat down on the ottoman across from him and pressed her hands together and thought. She should not be in the middle of this. She was day staff, significantly repositioned day staff with better terms and the right to be treated as a person. But still, she ironed linen. She maintained the East Wing. She was not equipped for any of what Ryo was describing, and getting closer to it could only hurt her. She knew all of this. She also knew that across the hall, in the South Study, a man was sitting with the weight of something enormous and the particular loneliness of people who have spent so long being powerful that they have forgotten how to ask for help. And beside her, in a tall chair, a 7-year-old boy was carrying information that was too heavy for him, for the same reason all children of powerful men carry heavy things, because nobody had thought to tell him he was allowed to put it down. "Here is what we're going to do," Precious said. Ryo looked at her. "You are going to tell me exactly what you heard. Everything. Every word. And then we are going to figure out together what, if anything, to do with it." She paused. "But Ryo, whatever we do, your father needs to know you heard it. You understand? You cannot carry this alone." He was quiet for a moment. "Will you come with me when I tell him?" "Yes," she said. "I'll come with you." He nodded. And then, slowly, or carefully, the way someone opens a window they are not sure is locked, he began to tell her everything. It took 40 minutes. By the end of it, Precious's hands were very still on her knees, and her mind was very loud. Because what Ryo had pieced together, from overheard conversations, from fragments across years, from the things 7-year-olds notice precisely because everyone forgets to be guarded around them, pointed to something she had not anticipated. The person who had hired Eleanor Voss was not an outside enemy. The person who had hired Eleanor Voss was someone inside this house. There is a particular kind of betrayal that does not announce itself. It doesn't come through the front door with noise and broken things. It has been inside the whole time, sitting at your table, using your name with warmth, learning everything about you that can later be used. Precious recognized it because she had seen it before. Oh, not here, not in the Shin estate, with its long corridors and enforced silences, but in her own life, years ago, in a version of herself that had been younger and less careful. She knew what this kind of betrayal looked like from the inside. She knew the shape of it. She knew, too, that the person Ryo's overheard conversations were pointing toward was one of only 4 people who had both the access and the knowledge required to brief someone like Eleanor Voss with the precision the security team had described in their report. 4 people. One of whom was Mr. Tai, loyal, careful, 19 years of service, a man whose face went pale when something threatened the estate. She crossed him off immediately, not because loyalty was impossible to fake. She knew better than that. But because the thing Ryo had said Eleanor Voss knew about was specifically related to the director's late wife, and the only people who knew those particular details. She stopped that line of thinking and went back to facts. Facts. Eleanor Voss had information about something that happened 6 years ago. Facts. She had used the late Mrs. Shin's name on a call designed to extort, which meant her information was not just financial or criminal. It was personal, intimate, the kind that comes from someone who was close to the family. Facts. She had been watching the estate for 6 weeks, which meant she had been specifically directed on what to look for and where. And one more fact, the one that had been sitting quietly in the back of Precious's mind since the moment Ryo finished speaking, was something she herself had noticed 3 weeks ago and filed away without understanding its significance. A door. The small connecting door between the East Wing storage room and the private corridor that led to the director's personal office. It had been left slightly open on a Thursday evening when Precious was late finishing her shift. She had thought nothing of it. Doors were left open in estates. It was not remarkable. But when she went to close it, she had seen, just for a second, just a glimpse, A phone on the floor. Face up. Screen bright. She had closed the door and gone home and not thought about it again. Until now. Because the East Wing storage room was not on the regular route of any member of the household staff, except one. One person whose duties specifically included East Wing maintenance, and whose schedule gave them reason to be in that corridor on Thursday evenings. Precious herself. Which meant whoever had been in that room had been there either because they knew Precious's schedule and had calculated she would not return, or because they had been using Precious's established presence in that corridor as cover. As an explanation, if anyone had seen them, she had been used as cover. Her reinstatement, the better terms, the restored position. It had not occurred to her to question it from this angle. She had understood it as what it appeared to be, a man correcting a wrong, guided by his son's conscience. And she still believed that part was true. But someone else, someone who knew about Eleanor Voss, who knew what was coming, had possibly seen an opportunity in the director's sudden impulse to make things right. Someone had wanted her back inside the estate. She sat with this for a long time. Then she went to find Director Shin. She did not go through Mr. Tay. She walked directly to the study, knocked once, and waited. "Come in." He was at his desk, papers spread in front of him, expression controlled in the way that meant he was working very hard on remaining controlled. He looked up, registered that it was her and not Mr. Tay. His expression shifted slightly, not to confusion, but to a careful attention that told her he had already learned, in a short time, that when she sought him out directly, it was worth paying attention. "Miss Millie, I need to speak with you," she said. "I need you to hear something from your son, and I need you to hear something from me. And I need you not to react to either of these things until I have finished. Can you do that?" He leaned back. "Yes." She went to get Rio. The three of them sat in the study, the director behind his desk, Rio in the large chair across from him that he had clearly chosen because it made him feel slightly taller, and Precious to the side, close enough to Rio that he could reach her if he needed to without it being conspicuous. Rio told his father what he had heard. He told it the same way he had told Precious, carefully, completely, in that steady voice that was simultaneously very old and very young. He did not flinch from the parts about his mother. He did not look at the floor. He held his father's gaze throughout, and what he found there, Precious watched it happen, was not the contained, armored distance he usually found, but something else. Something that opened slowly as Rio spoke, like a room being entered for the first time in a long while. When Rio finished, Director Shin was quiet for a very long time. "How long have you known all of this?" he said finally. His voice was not breaking, but close to it in the way that is sometimes more painful than breaking. A controlled fracture, something held together by force of will. "Pieces of it, for a long time," Rio said. "All of it together. Since this morning." "You should have told me." "When, Appa?" Rio said simply. Not accusing, just honest. "When would have been the right time? We don't talk about things like this. We don't talk about Uma at all. I have been waiting for the right time, and I don't think I was ever going to find it alone." The study was silent. Director Shin looked at his son for a long moment. Then he looked at the photograph that was still sitting on his desk, the one he had taken from the drawer. His wife. Young, laughing, head turned slightly as though she'd just heard something wonderful. "You kept count," he said quietly, an echo of what Rio had said about Precious's 4 unblemished years. "You've been keeping count of everything." "Someone has to," Rio said. Something broke open in Director Shin's face, not visible in any dramatic way, no tears, no collapse, but a change, real and complete, the kind that doesn't reverse. He stood from the desk and walked around it, and crouched in front of his son's chair, and put one hand on the arm of it. Not touching Rio. Not yet. Because they were not people who moved quickly into those gestures. But close. Present. Undeniably. Finally present. "I'm sorry," he said, "for making you carry things that were mine to carry." Rio looked at him for a long moment. Then he put his small hand over his father's. Neither of them spoke. Precious looked at the window and gave them the privacy of not being watched for a moment. Then she said, "There's something else. Something you need to know about the estate." Director Shin stood, back to the room, back to the thing that needed solving. But different now. She could see it. Something had shifted in his posture, by a fraction of degree, still formidable, still controlled, but with the corners showing. Human corners. The kind she had started to suspect were there. She told him about the door, the East Wing storage room, the phone, the Thursday evening. She told him her conclusion, careful, precise, making clear what was fact and what was inference. He listened without interrupting, without moving. When she finished, he said, "You think someone used your return as cover? I think it's possible. You think someone inside this house is connected to the woman on the phone? I think you need to consider it." He was quiet. Then, "Who has access to the East Wing on Thursday evenings?" "That's something your security team can determine better than I can," she said. "But I'd suggest checking without announcing that you're checking." He looked at her. "No, you've thought about this carefully." "You fired me for 11 seconds, and I spent the bus ride home with nothing to do but think," she said. It became a habit. Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but its first cousin. There and gone. "I'll need your statement about the door," he said. "Everything you remember. Exact time. Exact details." "I know." She paused. "Director Shin. Whoever this is, they know things about your wife. Things that are being used to hurt you. And that means they've been in your life for a while. Long enough to know details. Which means when you find out who it is..." She stopped. "It's going to hurt more than the threat itself. I want you to be prepared for that." The room was quiet. "I've been hurt before," he said. "Not like this," she said. "Not by someone you trusted inside your own house." He held her gaze, and she held his. And in that moment, in the study with the photograph on the desk, and Rio watching from the large chair, and something passed between them that neither of them was ready to name. A kind of recognition that has nothing to do with attraction, and everything to do with two people suddenly seeing each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. "Thank you," he said, "for coming back. For..." A pause. "For all of it." "Thank Rio," she said. "He's the one who called." They both looked at Rio. Rio was trying, with very limited success, to look as though he had not been watching every second of this exchange with the focused intensity of a scientist observing a particularly interesting experiment. "I was just being helpful," he said innocently. His father looked at him for a long moment. "You are," he said, "remarkably so." The investigation moved quickly after that, faster than Precious expected, faster than the betrayer had planned for. Because Director Shin, whatever his failures as a father and his coldness as an employer, was very good at this. The controlled, precise intelligence he had spent years directing at rivals and problems, he turned it inward, into his own household, and within 36 hours, he had what he needed. The Thursday phone, the East Wing access, the specific dates that corresponded with Eleanor Voss's documented surveillance records. All of it pointed to one person, his personal secretary of 11 years, a man named Teo Park, who had come recommended by an old acquaintance, but who had built his place in the Shin household on a foundation of quiet efficiency and demonstrated loyalty, and who had, 11 years ago, been briefly employed by a family with a very specific connection to the circumstances of the late Mrs. Shin's death. A family that had reason to want the director destroyed. A family that had been patient. Director Shin had Teo Park brought to the study on a Friday morning. He did not tell him why. He did not warn him what had been found. And he simply asked him to come in and sat behind his desk and placed a single printed document on the surface between them. A phone record, one date highlighted. He watched Teo Park's face, and in the 4 seconds between recognition and the performance of confusion, he saw everything he needed to see. 11 years. 11 years of proximity and access, and the particular intimate knowledge that comes from being trusted with every detail of a powerful person's life. And 11 years of waiting for the right moment, the right angle, the right pressure point. The right pressure point had been Mrs. Shin. What they had done, what Teo Park's patrons had done 6 years ago, was not something that could be explained in a study in 30 minutes. It would require lawyers and investigators, and the kind of careful documentation that Director Shin was already, even in that moment, setting in motion. But the core of it, the worst of it, was something that Precious had intuited, and Rio had half known, and Director Shin had. Somewhere beneath all his grief and his hardness, and his 14 months of unopened drawers, perhaps half suspected, without ever being able to face. His wife's death had not been what they told him. She had not simply... She had been. He could not, in the study. With Teo Park across from him, and the photograph on his desk, and his son somewhere in the East Wing reading a book about memories, he could not say all of it aloud. Yet. He was not ready. He had not yet had time to sit with what it meant and become a person who could carry it without it destroying him. But he looked at Teo Park, at this man who had smiled across thousands of mornings, who had carried his schedule, who had watched him grieve the very thing he had helped cause. And he was, and for the first time in 14 months, not sad. He was something else entirely. He was the man his enemies had always been afraid of. Finally, and for the right reason. "Get out of my house," he said quietly. And something in the way he said it, quiet as a door closing on something finished, made Teo Park stand without another word and leave. 6 weeks passed. 6 weeks is not long enough to rebuild a family, or heal a 14-month grief, or learn to be a father instead of a ghost moving through your son's life. But it is long enough to begin. And beginning, Precious had learned over years of her own hard beginnings, is everything. Beginning is the whole thing. Director Shin began. He did it imperfectly, in fits and starts, in silences that lasted too long, and sentences that stopped before they reached their destination. He did it the way people do when they have spent a long time being hard and are now, carefully and with great effort, trying to remember what it felt like to be otherwise. But he did it. That was what mattered. He started having dinner with Rio every evening, not always long, not always easy, but present. He started asking what Rio was reading, which Rio responded to with the barely contained delight of someone who has wanted exactly this for a very long time, and is determined not to scare it away by showing how much it means. He had the photograph framed. It hung now in the hallway outside the study, not hidden away in a drawer, not treated as something too painful to be seen, but there, in the light. His wife, young and laughing, head turned as though she had just heard something wonderful. Present in the house where she had lived, present for Rio to see every morning, Precious had been the one to suggest it. She had said it carefully, bracing for the controlled distance she was used to. But he had just looked at her for a moment and said, "No, I think you're right," in the tone of someone who had been waiting to be told exactly that by someone he trusted enough to hear it from. She had been surprised by that, by the trust. She was still learning to hold it, still learning the difference between the man she had spent 4 years being invisible to and the man who had, in 6 weeks, become something she did not have a clean word for. Not a friend, exactly. Something more complicated, and something that required more space than words like friend could contain, but that she wasn't ready, not yet, to call by its right name. She thought about it on the bus sometimes, on her way home in the early evenings, with the city moving past outside the window. She thought about the way he had said thank you in the study that day, not performatively, not as social punctuation, but as though he meant it entirely and understood its cost. She thought about the photograph he kept on his desk. She thought about his hands on the stair rail the night Rio had asked if he was broken, and the way they had been open rather than clenched. She thought about the fact that she was thinking about it. Then she thought about her mother, who would laugh her enormous, room-filling laugh at all of this, and then ask 17 direct questions. And she put her hands flat on her knees and looked out the window and told herself to be careful. Being careful was something she was very good at. It had kept her safe for a long time. She was beginning to wonder whether safe was the same as whole. The legal proceedings around Teo Park moved through channels she was not privy to. Director Shin was careful to shield Rio from the details, and by extension the staff, and she did not press. She knew enough. She knew that the truth about Mrs. Shin was being documented by people whose job it was to handle such truths, that it would take time, and that the director was spending a portion of every day in conversations with lawyers and investigators that left him quieter than usual in the evenings. A different kind of quiet than before. Not the armored kind, the processing kind, the kind of quiet that means something is being metabolized. She knew, too, that Eleanor Voss had been located, that she had, in fact, cooperated with the investigation in exchange for considerations she had quietly negotiated, which meant the information she had been hired to weaponize was now in the hands of people working on the right side of it. Director Shin had said this to her, directly in the garden, one afternoon when Rhea was at a school event and the estate was quiet, with the careful precision of someone who was aware that she had been part of how this had come to light and who felt she deserved to know the outcome. He had also said something else. He had said, "I've been thinking about what you told Rio, what about feelings coming out sideways." She had looked at him. That careful, evaluating look she had, the one he had told her once, with something that might have been wonder in his voice, was the most unnerving thing he had ever encountered in his own home. He stopped, started again. "It's been pointed out to me, by my son, by my attorney, and now apparently by my own memory, that I have spent 14 months being very sideways, and that the people in this house, including you, absorbed a considerable amount of that." A pause. "I'm aware that an apology for 11 seconds does not begin to cover 4 years of—" "Director Shin, let me finish," he said. And she stopped, because he said it not with authority, but with the particular urgency of someone who has rehearsed something and is afraid that if they are interrupted, they will not be able to begin again. 4 years of invisibility, of being in a house and being unseen. I know what that costs a person. I know it now. And he paused. I don't have a clean way to say this because I am not a person who says things cleanly when they matter. So I'll just say, I see you. Now. Clearly. And I wish I had long before I had reason to be forced to. The garden was very quiet. A leaf let go of the persimmon tree and drifted down. Precious looked at him for a long time, and he held the look, held it in the way she had noticed he held things now, steadily and without flinching. The old armored Hyun-soo Shin would have looked away when something real got too close. This one stayed. "That was not unclean," she said finally. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "No?" It was actually quite precise. She paused. "You do that more than you think, when you stop performing being contained and just speak." She tilted her head. "Rio does the same thing. Must be hereditary." He was quiet for a moment. "He told me you said the best things are true before they're brave." "I don't remember saying it quite like that. He has a gift for editorial clarity." She laughed. Quiet, genuine, not the polished social kind, the real kind that has no audience. And he watched it, not hungrily, not with the intensity of someone wanting something from her, but with the careful attention of a person encountering something they have been a long time without and are taking seriously. "Miss Millie," he said, and then stopped. "Precious," she said. "You can call me Precious." After a gesture that encompassed the garden, the house, the 6 weeks, the 11 seconds, the photograph in the hallway, all of it. "After all of this, you can call me Precious." "Precious," he said. Her name in his voice was different from the way anyone else said it. Careful, like something being held with both hands. I would like to not go back to how things were before. Before any of this. I know that is a complicated thing to say. I know it asks something. I am not asking. I am not in a position to ask anything of you. But I wanted to say it. Plainly. She was quiet. He waited. He was learning to wait. Rio had said his father was learning to wait. And she had seen it. The new patience, the new willingness to hold space for an answer without filling it. "That is," she said slowly, "the most terrifying thing anyone has said to me in a very long time. I know. You understand that I am day staff. Significantly repositioned day staff with better terms, but I know what you are," he said. "I know what I am. I'm not asking you to resolve either of those things right now. I'm just a pause. I'm asking if it's possible. If you are open to possible." She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at the persimmon tree, at the bench where Rio always sat with his books, kicking his feet, at the garden where she had come to say goodbye and had somehow ended up staying, saying yes, walking into a story she had not planned to be part of. She thought about her mother, who would laugh and ask 17 questions. She thought about herself. 26. Careful. Very good at safe. Beginning to wonder whether safe and whole were the same. "I think," she said, "that possible is a reasonable place to start." She did not look back at him as she said it. She was looking at the tree. But she heard it. The smallest, most controlled exhale, the sound of a man who had been holding his breath without knowing it, finally allowed to breathe. She looked at him then. And he was looking at her, not with the entitled, unseeing gaze of the man who had dismissed her in 11 seconds, so not with the distant grief of the man who apologized to walls, but with something new. Something that was both very simple and very enormous. Something that looked a great deal like the beginning of being known. They didn't say anything more. They did not need to. Inside the house, in the second-floor library, Rio was sitting in the tall chair with his book open, his feet swinging, his face wearing an expression of extremely poorly concealed satisfaction. Because he had suggested to his father, so 3 days ago, that the garden was a very nice place to have an important conversation. He had said it casually, the way someone says something they have thought about very carefully. He had also made sure that afternoon's schedule was entirely clear. Almost 8, he thought, and already a genius. He opened his book and went back to the boy who read other people's memories, the boy who said that even the sad ones were worth knowing, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that all the corners of the house were full, not with noise, not with the forced brightness of people performing happiness for each other, but with something quieter and more permanent, the particular warmth of a home that has finally stopped pretending the hard things did not happen, and has decided, instead, to build something real on the other side of them. The photograph hung in the hallway. The drawer was no longer locked, and somewhere in the East Garden, as a conversation that had started with an 11-second dismissal and a child's question on a staircase was becoming, slowly and imperfectly and with great care, something that neither of them had expected, but that both of them, and one very small, very perceptive, almost 8-year-old, had needed more than they could say. There are stories that teach you what love looks like at its most spectacular, grand and cinematic and impossible to miss. And then there are the other kind. From the ones that teach you what it looks like when it's real, when it starts in a stairwell where someone is counting to 11, when it lives in a child who notices everything and says it plainly, when it grows in a garden under a persimmon tree between two people who are learning, slowly, honestly, without any guarantee, to be seen. This was the other kind, and those are always the ones worth watching. If this story found something in you that needed finding, share it with someone who needs to hear that being seen is not too much to ask for. Subscribe and stay with these stories, because every new one is built to remind you that healing is not a single moment. It is 1,000 small choices made daily by people brave enough to begin.